Here we go.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. This is Jen with Augusta. We are a home care recruiting agency, and what we do is we help home care agency owners tap into a new pool of caregivers to apply to your jobs. I typically work with home care agency owners that are frustrated about not being able to hire enough caregivers to even staff their current shifts, let alone grow their business. And the home care agency owners that I've worked with are able to recruit up to 40 applicants a month at up to a 35% applicant to hire rate. And so I am so excited today to have an interview with Anne-lise Gere from Gere Consulting. She is a HR expert for home care, and just so excited to be able to share some of her knowledge and her expertise with our audience here. So Anne-lise, I'd love for you to just start by a short intro of yourself, and then I'll jump into some questions for you.
Of course. So thank you, Jen, for having me on today. You mentioned Gere Consulting in the intro. That's the name of my business, and it's a small woman-owned business. I've been in business for almost 11 years. So last year I was able to celebrate 10 years. I actually had a reception, invited all my current and past clients to coastal Virginia, which is where I am. And by the way, this background is not a real background. That's not coastal Virginia. But anyway, I got my start very young when I started working in HR as an intern during my undergrad studies. Really liked it, got a job, started working for Procter & Gamble. Over the years, life has taken me from Europe to the United States, and after several jobs as an HR professional in the US, I decided that I was going to go off on my own and start my consultancy firm. And as we all know, starting a small business, whether it's home care or HR consulting, is hard the first few years. And very often, if you're in that position, you're probably wondering if you should, get out and get a job. And we all have that temptation. But I stuck with it through thick and thin, and 11 years on, I can say that it was a good decision for me in terms of being able to develop an expertise, being recognized by an industry such as home care, and being able to be a parent to my 3 children, as well as being a contributing professional in my field.
Awesome. So what made you decide to focus on home care?
So home care found me in 2013. So I had been in business for a couple of years at that point, and somebody I knew from the local community here in coastal Virginia grabbed me one day, and I didn't know she was a small business owner. And she said, I own a home care agency, a Visiting Angel franchise, and I need an employee handbook, and I need you to develop job descriptions for me. And that's how I learned about the industry, which was really different from everything I had done before, which was either manufacturing or professional white collar industry. And by working with Visiting Angel for a couple of years on and off, I learned about the industry. The other thing that really was instrumental for me was I met Steve Weiss, also known as Steve the Hurricane. He attended a professional conference in Virginia in 2015, and he was doing his usual sales and marketing spiel. I was really impressed by the guy. I thought he really had a lot of, he has a very flashy personality, but he has also a lot of actual knowledge to back it up, which is not always the case. And I just went and introduced myself after his presentation, and he was like, "Oh, HR, we get so many questions about HR in our industry, of course, but we're not HR professionals, we're sales and marketing professionals, so we don't like to answer those questions. We don't know if we're answering those questions right." And through this partnership over the years, we I've grown my expertise in the industry, my reach, and I think I'm one of the very few HR professionals in the country that has that deep level and understanding of the private duty home care industry.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was trying to find somebody to interview, you were the first person who came to mind for me, because I've always known you to be just have such a depth of experience and expertise specific to home care HR. So, I mean, that's amazing.
Yes, and through the years, I'm also a big student of the industry in general. So I read every day. I read, the press, now the digital press, of course, but I keep on learning. I'm a student. I'm also a university college professor in my spare time. So that's something I'm always learning. I'm always thinking through things. And so, yes.
That's awesome. I didn't know that, but that's amazing.
Yeah, I teach at the Luder School of Business at Christopher Newport University, which is a small liberal arts public university here in Virginia.
Oh, cool. So kind of speaking of always learning and current events, what is your take on the Great Quit? And how do you think successful home care agencies are starting to kind of make their way through this really big labor shakeup?
Right. So when we talk about the workforce in home care industry, for me, I really see two different employee population. There's the hourly direct care workers, also known for shorthand as caregivers. I know some agencies call them, home care pros. I mean, but let's call them caregivers for the sake of, a sort of a quick shorthand. And then you've got the office staff, the schedulers, the office administrators, and to some degree, even the nurse, the clinical staff will, I think, sort of fit in that category. And so the caregiver workforce has always had a high turnover rate. It's been very high now. On average, Home Care Pulse tells us that's about 65%. It's been pretty stable since 1918, around 2018, sorry, 1918. That was something else in 1918. That was the flu. Anyway, the previous pandemic. But so for years it's been stable, but sadly at very high levels. Right. And then we had the office staff that tended to be more stable. What we've seen since I call it the Great Resignation, but the Great Quit works as well, is that workforce has also had a higher turnover rate. Not as bad as caregivers, but just because everybody is looking for changing jobs right now. I mean, 4.5 million American workers every month are quitting their jobs and getting a new job. Most of them, not all of them, some of them are quitting and they probably won't return to the workforce. And so home care, as more in the professional ranks, is not immune to that. Mm-hmm. So that's two different populations, two different way of tackling it, I think. So in terms of how we handle that for caregivers, well, some of in truth, being a good employer always yields good results. But what does that really mean? So for instance, for caregivers, the best agencies actually didn't really stop recruiting during the pandemic. They actually adapted to, and they did a lot of different things to adapt. Now, going forward, trying to go back to recruiting, it's all about meeting the needs of the caregiver. And because it's such a employer-driven market at this time, right? Mm-hmm. Employees have been able to set sort of their conditions much more than they have in the past. They're really in a position of of power, because there's about 2 jobs per people available for work.
Mm-hmm.
On average. It's 1.9 something, right? That's what we
Yeah.
know from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. So it means that employers are really in a position of, they'll take almost anybody who's got a pulse at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for caregivers, and sometimes my clients joke about that, you know, when we talk about recruitment, they're like, we make sure that they have full limbs and that they can speak English somewhat correctly. And if they're willing to, you know, and if they have some sort of certification, then they've got a job.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the reality of it. But, you know, caregivers, what do they want out of a job? They want enough hours. It's a fragile population typically, where they really need to make money to pay for the basic necessities of life. So being able to have enough hours with one employer is really, if you're able to do that, that's critical. Then having stable hours as well. So it means pretty much setting yourself up with a shift pattern. So you are not doing 2 hours on Monday, 6 hours on Tuesday, 4 hours on Wednesday. You're working, you know, 4, 6, or 8 hours Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, depending on how many hours, you know, you as an employee is willing and able to work. That means that for the home care agencies, they have to really change the way they operate. So they are not going to Mrs. Smith and saying, hey, Mrs. Smith, when would you like to receive care? They're going to Mrs. Smith and saying, Mrs. Smith, we have a wonderful caregiver, Jenna, and she will be available to take care of you 4 hours a day as a minimum, 3 days of the weeks, 5 days of the weeks. And by starting managing, so it's about how you structure your business. And by having those sort of shift patterns, 4 hours, 6 hours, or 8 hours a day, you're allowing people to have more of a living wage and much more stable hours.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really important. And I mean, obviously, if you're just starting in home care, you're probably not quite in a position to set the hours for your clients, but you can try to sort of drive them that way, saying, you know, the way we operate is, that's how we do things here. So if you want to receive care from us, and we would be delighted to provide you with care, then that's how we're going to structure your visits throughout the week.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, most agencies are turning down business. That's something we know as well from Home Care Pulse study, is that upward of 90% of agencies have had to turn down cases because they just cannot staff them. So the chances are somebody coming to you asking for care, they've talked to at least 1 or 2 agencies before who said, you know what, we're not going to take you, or we're going to put you on a wait list. So if you're coming and saying, hey, we're going to take care of you, and this is how we do business, I think clients are quite likely to take you up on that. Mm-hmm. But it's about having the confidence to do that, right? As in terms of how you structure your operation. And because you're able to provide stable hours and a set amount of hours, you're much more attractive to caregivers. And so that's really the base minimum. You also want to, of course, be paying a wage that is competitive for your area. And that varies widely across the country. So the Bay Area, which is where you're focusing your effort at this time, Jen, is known to be very, you know, expensive and thus high paying. If you're in, I have a client right now who is in the middle of rural Arkansas. They have, you know, they have difficulty recruiting, but their starting wages are around $13 an hour, and they're really leading the pack there for their industry. But know what a competitive wage is for your area is very important. Another aspect of being attractive to caregivers is making sure that you provide them with cases that they can successfully handle. So the acuity of care is something that they have done before. So don't give a brand new caregiver, and I know it sounds obvious, but sometimes we do mistakes like that, where we're going to give somebody who's fairly junior in the profession, has maybe done 1 or 2 cases before, a very complex case. And remember, those caregivers are alone in the field, and typically they don't feel comfortable calling the nurse and say, hey, I need help with X, Y, and Z. They just don't do it. So, which leads to another aspect, is when you start a case, make sure that you spend enough time with the caregiver to really show them every single thing about the house, about the patient, about what they need to do, and even operate simple things like the dishwasher, the washing machine, the dryer. It sounds pretty obvious, but some of our caregivers, they don't own appliances like that at home, and so we can't assume that they know how to operate them. And so giving them that level of comfort that they've seen how to do it, they're much less likely to walk off the case in the first 3 shifts, because that happens. We know that 30 to 50% of caregivers just quit in the first 90 days. Even sooner, first 30 days. So why is that? Well, sometimes they're just not cut for the profession. Sometimes they're just like overwhelmed by the complexity of what they're asked to do alone, without what they perceive any support, right? And then, what I call the cherry on the cake is making sure that caregivers know that they are seen. So having some sort of, continuous touch points. Every 30 days, you must go and lay eyes on them, or have a phone call that's not related to PP and schedule. And then also having that they feel safe. So we're still somewhat in a COVID environment, but are all the COVID protocols and PP available to them ongoing? And then the traditional safety protocols that, when we bring somebody into somebody else's home, firearms, basic safety, hygiene, depending on the type of clientele you serve. Sometimes some of those homes are not quite borderline, not places you would want to live, right? So making sure that we're sending our caregivers in places that are safe for them as well is important. So that's kind of in a nutshell some of the things that I think are important, both for recruitment and retention early on.
That's just that's so helpful and such good advice. I hear from caregivers every day that they are looking for that stability in their schedule. And so managing it on the front side with your clients and bringing that information up front to your client to let them know that this is how we operate in 4-hour shifts, and and what the schedule would be.
Yes.
Not just kind of blanket, oh, we can probably find a caregiver to help you. I think that's such a good way to
and early on setting those expectations is critical. And the other thing is, if people say, well, I don't need 4 hours. Well, who is saying I don't need 4 hours? Is it the family member, or is it the actual care recipient? And if truly they do not need 4 hours, because somebody who is at the point where they need assistance in the home, everything is long and complicated. Getting dressed, getting bathed, moving about. You can't do much in 2 hours with somebody who is, and throw dementia on top of that, right? So if they truly only need a couple of hours here and there during the week, they're probably not quite ready for home care yet. They're probably looking for sort of a companion, sort of, maybe care.com would be the answer to their needs at this point. Sometimes and again, because there is a lot more demand for service than we are able to provide as an industry, I think being very discriminatory and making sure that you're going to the clients that truly need help and can afford also to pay for the help, there's nothing wrong with that. You're basically setting yourself up for success, and you're setting yourself up for being a good employer.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome advice. Thank you for that. So even in this very tight labor market, um, uh, which is, it's definitely a challenge to recruit and to be a good employer and maintain that status. But even still, I mean, we work in an industry that is mostly women, and a large portion of people of color. So I'd love to hear from you about what are some of the tips that you would have for home care owners to continue to keep an eye on their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and keep those
Mhm.
moving forward, even in this kind of a tight labor market.
So when I think about home care, I think of it as a very diverse industry.
Hmm.
We know that traditionally caregiving has been one of the, first occupation of choice for first generation immigrants.
Hmm.
And so, and depending on where you are in the country, that looks very different,
Hmm.
right? So one of my clients is in New Jersey, sort of greater New York City area, and they have I think 90% of their workforce is Latino, and they service probably 60 to 70% of a Spanish speaker as their market. However, they're having the opposite problem, which is they're trying to recruit English speaking caregivers, and they're having trouble finding, the caregivers say, yes, I can speak English. And when they're faced with somebody who is maybe not a native English speaker, is maybe Indian, and English is a language of commonality, it gets to be tricky if you're not a native speaker. I'm not a native speaker myself. I was born in France. So I think that's, from a ethnic and racial diversity, I think home care usually does pretty well. And that's true across the ranks. I mean, when you go to home care professional conferences, you're talking to agency owners and the leadership, it's a very diverse group of people. At least that's been my experience, and I've been pretty much across the country at this point in different conferences. So I think from a racial and ethnic diversity, home care does pretty well. When it comes to the gender diversity, I mean, caregiving has always been a female profession. It's just hard to recruit men, and frankly, a lot of clients are not comfortable with male caregivers.
Hmm.
So women do not want a male caregiver typically,
Hmm.
and many men want a woman caregiver.
Hmm.
It's the rare bird who says, I really want a male caregiver. So that is kind of, baked in sort of societal sort of vision of what caregiving is. Um, there are some very good male caregivers, but they're few and far between. I don't know how your experience has been on that one.
I, uh, um, yeah, I have seen, I mean, I would say it's, definitely, as we know, woman dominated industry in terms of the actual caregiver, that I see it every single day. I would say that there's some clients of ours I've seen able to hire more male caregivers, and I'm not. I know that one of the things that our clients do to attract them is in the way that they position their business and marketing. They actually literally show more people who look like the types of caregivers that they want to attract
Right.
in their engagement content on social media and things like that.
And
Um,
sometimes they will
but
put ads out saying looking for
mhm,
male caregivers.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I do think though that, I mean, in my experience, I mean, I probably agree, the vast majority of clients that I've ever heard from are happy to have a female caregiver. and not a huge amount of requests for male caregivers. But uh, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess I guess if the industry doesn't see it as a problem, is it a problem? I don't know.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the in terms of LGBTQ diversity, I mean, I know that in large metro areas, some agencies actually focus on that market from a customer standpoint. And so because that's how they position themselves, they tend to recruit caregivers who will be allies or, members of those communities. But I don't think there's a big push of that because it's just so hard to get anybody at this point. It's like if somebody is interested and is able to do it, we'll take them and we'll teach them. That's one thing I've seen very much is, recruit for the, have the right personality. And then if you're lacking the skills or if you don't have the certification, we'll work with you to get you there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think one thing our industry is maybe not, at least in my experience, and I don't know about you, but there's not a huge maybe understanding or realization of how unconscious bias plays into the hiring process. And I think that's something in my experience that's been really helpful for me as I've started to actually recruit caregivers myself, of checking my own assumptions when I'm doing an interview with a candidate who maybe doesn't have English as their first language, or is coming from clearly a different ethnic or cultural background, or is gender diverse or something along those lines. So I know I went personally and sought out some unconscious bias training that I just found on the web for myself, so that way I could, make sure to make to do everything I can to kind of put that to the side. And I mean, now one of the things that I do is I have a standard list of interview questions.
Of course.
And
yes.
that's, I mean, it's kind of like, oh, of course, right. Like right.
You want to focus on their skills and their abilities, and making sure they feel comfortable and welcome. That's one thing as well that a lot of agencies don't do very well, is when they bring their caregivers on site, they just don't treat them like precious resources. There is still that sort of, if you don't like it, there's gonna be another one behind you willing to take the job, and that is not the case nowadays. And so really treating those applicants as, gosh, thank you so much for coming, we're excited to have you. These are really simple things, very easy to do, and hopefully you want to carry through that once they come on board with you. But they're not commodities, they are precious resources at this point, truly.
So Anne-lise, tell me, you with your 11 years of experience doing this, you have probably run into some really big challenges, some really small challenges over your time, but I'd love to hear from you just about a couple of the most common HR challenges that you see for home care agencies. What keeps coming up over and over again?
So one of the things that came apparent to me probably 3 years into working with home care agencies is how important the quality of the office staff is. So if you have a professional, caring office staff, you create a culture that is professional and caring. And so you will attract people, caregivers, who kind of fit that mode, or will respond well to being treated with, professionally and with care. And too often home care agencies have just recruited people that were just good enough. And it's just, it doesn't carry through. And so it really became apparent to me when I was working with an agency that had 2 people. and they had 65 caregivers. And I was like, oh my God, how can you do that? That's so unusual. And really, it boiled down to the fact that these two people were one was the agency owner, and the other one was basically a scheduler slash recruiter slash office manager. I mean, this woman was a superwoman. She was super organized. She had systems in place for everything. She had been doing it for a long time at that point. And they were able to handle a lot of things because they had systems in place, but they were able to handle a lot of things, and they had systems in place because they had people who were thinking with, how do we simplify? How do we, let's not reinvent the wheel every time something happens. We need to have processes in place. And I'm a big process-driven person, and it just made so much sense. And I've seen it time and again. Agencies that have a strong office personnel, they do very well. Those who have weak people, they have high turnover. And so it's like every 6 months, it's like starting from scratch again. That's exhausting. It's expensive, and you're just not building your business. So that's the first piece. The other aspect of, the big challenge right now is, of course, recruitment. And so the best recruitment you can do is keeping the caregivers you already have. And so that's twofold: are you utilizing your workforce to the maximum? So do you have caregivers who would want to work more hours and are not right now, and they are getting those extra hours from another agency? And then the other one is making sure that the ones that are working and are happy with the hours, that they don't quit. And so there's different times where we know caregivers will be more susceptible to quitting. So it's the first 90 days. So put in place a solid onboarding to really hold the hands of your caregivers during that sort of red danger zone of the first 90 days. And then, once a case comes to an end, we know that exposure to death is also increases the chances of a caregiver quitting. So what do we put in place to prevent that? That's another sort of, pivotal moment, or just when they lose a case because somebody's going to a facility, or, for whatever reason, the case ends. Are you proactive telling the caregivers, we have more work for you? We will keep you employed, because the traditionally the culture of the industry has been, oh, my case ends, so I'm probably going to be back, looking for another case, another job, maybe with another agency. And so being very proactive there, I think, will help with retention.
I think that's great advice. And yeah, I mean, we all know that, and I mean, maybe sometimes we don't give it as much credence as we should, is that for anybody who's been a caregiver, the first time that you lose a patient, and that it is so, it's very emotional.
Of course, because you become emotionally involved with your clients, of course.
Yeah, and it's an obvious source of stress, and one of the things that another inflection point in your relationship with a caregiver, where they could absolutely, leave the industry because of that. That's definitely something that I've seen. And it was when I was a professional caregiver in a memory care community, that was one of the things that made me want to, find a different way to be in the industry. Helping a professional caregiver through the process of either a client moving on to a facility-based care, like a assisted living or memory care or something like that, and helping them through that process of a client is dying on hospice, and making sure that they're supported in that process. We know that's one of the places when in your relationship with a caregiver, when they could, look for other types of work, because it is so challenging. So making sure they're supported in that process. And then, as you said, Anne-lise, making sure that they know that not only are they going to get a little bit of support from you, but also that there are going to be other opportunities to work with new types of clients, and hopefully ones that will fill up their schedule in the way that they're looking for, which, I mean, that all might make sense. I mean, so many people these days are working that I speak with that are caregivers that are looking for work are already working 2 or 3 jobs. And so that giving them that, making sure that they know at those important points in your relationship with them that that there are going to be more opportunities and that you're working to get them that full-time full-time work that they're hoping for. Because it would be a lot easier to manage if they had full-time work, especially because we know most caregivers are mothers or have families that they're caring for as well. So,
Yep.
So awesome. Thank you so much, Anne-lise,
You're
for
welcome.
sharing.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, for sharing some of these insights. It was really helpful. And I hope our listeners and our watchers got something out of it and took a couple tips away. So if folks watching this want to learn a little bit more about your services and potentially connect with you, how would they go about that?
The best way is to go to my website, gereconsulting.com. And there's actually, I publish an article, home care specific, once a month. And I've been at it since 2015. So there is a wealth of information on my website. And, there's also, if they want to get in touch with me, there's a way to contact me through my website. And of course, that will, shoot an email directly to my inbox and I will see it quickly. So that's probably the best way.
Awesome. Excellent.
And they can even sign up for the newsletter, which I would encourage people to do. They'll receive something on Wednesday, once a week, no more, no less. We're very, very regular. And hopefully they'll pick up a lot of good HR tips.
Nice. Awesome. And if anyone wants to learn more about Augusta and how we can help you recruit more applicants from a new pool of talent, go to our website, augusta.care, and check us out. And you can book a demo and schedule some time with me and my team members. So again, Anne-lise, thank you so much for your time. And it was a pleasure speaking with you.
Same here. Thank you, Jen. Bye now.